Luana Moss, the Hat Lady. Today I'm going to talk to you about one of the other judges in our book of Judges. Remember that we said that the judges did not necessarily um, do as God had instructed, um, although you can see God's power and you can see his um, plan for his Israelite. You can see how they uh, are instructed to bring the people back to him and how God uses the judges to bring revenge on the enemies of the Israelite people. And we see this with Samson. Samson, although he did not really obey God, uh, he was vulnerable to so many things, especially women. But God used him in spite of all of that. God had planned for Samson even before Samson was born. God came as an angel to Samson's mother, and he said to her, "You have not had any children, and I'm going to give you a son. You are not to eat and drink of any strong drink, alcohol or strong drink. You are not to eat anything unclean. There's special instructions that I want you to do because this son is to be raised as a Nazarite." Now, Samson's mother went immediately to her husband and told her husband that this man had appeared to her and told her to give her these instructions. And he said, I want him to come again. And so he prayed to God that God would bring this man again so that he could talk to him and understand how they were to raise their son. And so the angel appeared again to the woman. And when he came back, her husband was not with her. So she went and got her husband. Her husband came to see the angel of God, not knowing that he was an angel of God, but he offered to bring him food and drink, water to drink, or to bring him a meal. And so when he came back, actually before he left, the man said, "Don't get a meal, for I will not eat, but bring a sacrifice." And so the man, Samson's father, brought a sacrifice. He laid it on a rock in front of the angel of the Lord and followed the instructions that the angel gave him. Fire came up and consumed the meal, and the man disappeared up with the flame of fire also. So they knew that this was an angel of God. They said, "We have seen God. Will we even live?" And the woman said to the man, "I think so, because God would not have revealed all of this stuff to us if he didn't intend for us to do as he said." And so they had Samson. They named him Samson when he was born. But Samson didn't really have regard for his chosen position as a Nazarite. They were not to cut his hair. He was not to drink strong drink. They were, he was not to eat anything unclean. Now, Samson seems to have a disregard for all of his special call that God had called him to do, because when he grows up, he decides that he wants to marry a Philistine, the enemy's daughter. And he finds a woman that he wants to marry, and he says to his dad, "Go and get her," not realizing that this was God's plan. It was a time of judgment for Samson. For Samson, as Samson acquired this lady, he was going down to visit her, and he ran across a lion, and he just tore the lion apart and killed it. And then as he went back another time to visit, he turned aside to see the lion, and he found out in the carcass of a lion, bees had made a honeycomb and had built honey in the honeycomb. And so he took from the lion honey and ate it. He even took some home to his mother and father, of course, not telling them that it came out of an unclean animal that he had killed. So he had a great disregard, it seems like, for God's laws and for God's hand upon his life even. He marries a Philistine. That was not seeking God. He eats from an unclean animal, even gives some of the honey to his mother and father, and them not unknowingly partaking of honey that was in an unclean animal. And then he goes down to visit his wife, gives a riddle to his wife. He says, or actually to her companions, he says, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. Now he made a bet on this with the companions of the Philistines here. He says, if you can answer my riddle, then I will repay you with 30 changes of clothes, 30 wraps, and 30 pieces of clothing. But if you cannot, then you will pay me 30 wraps and 30 changes of clothes. So he was intending to gain profit from this riddle. However, his wife enticed him over and over again during that time to tell her the riddle. And then she shared it with the Philistine companions there, and they were able to answer, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? Look at his response. This is in verse 18. If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. Isn't that cute? So he wasn't a dumb man, but in many respects he was. But he comes back then, and the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, and he goes out and kills 30 people, 30 Philistines, in order to acquire the debt that he owed the companions of his wife. Thus, the men, then the dad, Samson's father, when he came back to be with his wife, said, I've given her away. I thought you had left and weren't coming back. And he says, I gave her to her companion. You can't have her anymore. He says, take her younger sister. Now, Samson was really upset. He thought that they had tricked him and that they had deceived him, and he wanted revenge. So he goes out and he takes 300 foxes, ties the tails together and puts a torch in between each tail so that the foxes go out pulling against each other and set all the fields of the Philistines on fire, and they burn up. Well, when the Philistines find out that it is Samson, and this, they go to Samson's father-in-law and his wife's house, and they burn it down. Now Samson decides, hey, I'm going to take revenge on you, and then I will, after that, then I will quit. So he takes revenge on the Philistines, and then he goes down and hides because he told them that he was only going to take revenge, and then he would leave. And so he goes and he hides um, in Judah, in a mountain, in a cleft, a rock. The men, the Philistines, come to Judah to um, find Samson. And they come, and Judah says, "Why are you coming against us?" And they said, "Because of Samson." And they said, "Oh, we'll go get Samson and turn him over to you." And so they go and find Samson, tell Samson, "Don't you know, Samson, that these Philistines are our rulers, and you have set them against us?" And Samson says, "Oh," he says, "just bind me up with ropes as long as you promise not to kill me, and turn me over to him." And so they did. They took Samson bound and gave him to the Philistines. When the Philistines saw Samson and Samson saw the Philistines, he pulls the ropes and breaks them as if they were nothing. He finds the only thing he sees there is a jawbone of a donkey, and he takes that jawbone of the donkey and he kills the Philistines that have come against him. Now they are really angry with Samson. He's the judge of the area. He's taking care of the people, the Israelites, against their enemies, the Philistines. But he had a weakness. His weakness was women. And he found a harlot that he would go into. And the people in that city found out Samson was in there, and so they hid and intended to capture him during the night. Now, Samson realized some way or another, he knew, and he went out to the gates of the city and took the gates and carried him up to a great mountain to display, I guess, his power. And so another time then, they're still after him. They still do not like Samson. Samson finds a woman named Delilah. We've all heard the story of Delilah. She comes to Samson. They offer to pay her to find out why or where Samson got his power and his strength. So she talks to Samson over and over again. "Why won't you tell me? Why won't you tell me where the source of your strength is?" And he said, "If you will take 7 strands of cord that have not been dried out and wrap them together and bind me, I will be like any other man." And so she did this. And then she cried out, "Samson, Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He easily breaks the cords and frees himself. Now, she is very upset that he has not told her the truth. And she kept nagging and nagging at him until again he says, "Well, if you'll take 2 new ropes and bind me with these ropes, I will be just like any other man." And she did this, and she says, "Samson, Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He easily breaks those cords, frees himself, and she is still very determined that she's going to find out the source of his strength. So she keeps nagging and nagging and nagging at him, and he gets closer and closer to the truth, saying, "This time, if you'll just take my hair and braid it." Now he's reached the real source of his power, which is really God. But God told him not to cut his hair. So this time, when he defies God and his hair is cut, he finds that his strength is gone. But this time, she didn't get that far yet. She braids his hair and pins it up, and she yells, "Samson, Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He pulls the pin out, and his strength is there as it always has been, and he is able to free himself again. But then he tells her the real truth. He said, if you would but cut my hair, I would be like any other man. And so she causes him to fall asleep on her knees, and she shaves his head, and the Spirit of God leaves her. The true strength, the Spirit of God, has left Samson, but he doesn't even know it. She says, Samson, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he raises up like any other time. But this time, his strength is gone, for God has left him. And he is bound by the Philistines. His eyes are punched out. He cannot see now. He is put in prison and left to die in prison and to be mocked. So, as he's being mocked by those Philistines, time passes, his hair begins to grow again, and the Philistines decide to have a big party for their God. They have it in a great big place where 3,000 men have gathered, important men of the Philistines. The wives are on top of the building, waiting to make fun of Samson. And as they party for their god Dagon, they call out for Samson to come forth so they can mock and criticize him, make fun of his God. He is now powerless. And Samson realized that his hair has gone out, and he prays, realizing that God is the strength and his power. And he says, oh God, give me one last revenge on these Philistines. And he asked the boy who is taking him down to the center to make fun of him, he asked him to lean him up against the two pillars in the middle of the place where they are gathered. And he says, so I can lean on the pillars. And the boy shows him the two pillars. Samson, as he prays, pulls the two pillars together, and the whole place falls in. He kills all the Philistines that are gathered there, including himself and the people that are gathered on top of the place. So in his death, Samson judges the Philistines, the enemy of the Israelite people. And God takes care of Samson. Despite his disobedience, despite his disregard for God, God shows grace and mercy to Samson. Thank you, God, that you show us grace and mercy, just as you showed Samson. Father, help us to understand the reason for your laws are for our good, and help us to be obedient to your commands. Amen. Thank you for listening to my story. See you next time.